Okay, now we're going into part two on this idea about Seth Parebsen. But in the first of this one, I want to mention how it's turned into Set and Seth and what this god meaned and how he worked with the Osiris myth. You can see here as it talks about it, let's zoom in a little bit, that Set or Seth, like in the Bible, is also translated as Sheth, Setesh, Sutek, Setan, Satan, Seth, Merksha, Seteth, Setek, or Suti. Setan means not the devil like everybody thinks, but it actually just meant the aggressor or the opposer or someone who is against you, perhaps. Now, this is just a yin yang thing that gets taken way out of context. In your Bible, it's blown off into a idea of being good and evil and how it switches back and forth. But let's look into this. He's a god of chaos, fire, and deserts. So it has to work with a red desert. Trickery, storms, envy, disorder, violence, and foreigners in ancient Egyptian religion. In ancient Greek, the god's name is given as Seth. Set had a positive role where he accompanies Ra on his solar boat to repel Apep. Oh, pardon me, guys. And so here's a depiction of that. And you can see that Horus is here as the sun disk. And as they go across the sky on a boat at this time, later you see depictions of chariots and horses pulling the sun across. But Set is the one that fends off and kills Apep and makes it to where they can go all the way around again. So it's pretty neat. The Serpent of Chaos is that Apep. So actually, it is Seth himself that that destroys chaos and brings order together with Osiris, but there's a togetherness here that's seen that's not readily talked about. For when we get to the story, there's bad and yin and yang and but it really just shows you the circle of life and things also in a simple allegory that people sometimes look past. Set had a positive role where he accompanies Ra in his solar boat to repel Apep, the Serpent of Chaos. Set had a vital role as a reconciled combatant. He was Lord of the Red Desert, and so red-haired also goes with that, but also with the lava gods from way before in Typhon and so on, and that's why they make so much connection. He was red-haired with blue eyes. He was the Lord of the Red Desert land, where he was the balance to Horus, his role as Lord of the Black Soil land, or the fertile land. And of course, because he goes off of Osiris in the myth, then he is a type of rebirth and the season where it comes back. They even have these rituals where he is said to have masturbated into the Nile River that started it, and all these weird things that come out of it and everything. But that's the rebirth type situation, and he apparently is taking the idea or role of Father Time and even Herald of Spring at the same time, right? In some aspects. In the Osiris myth, the most important Egyptian myth, Set is portrayed as the usurper who killed and mutilated his own brother, Osiris. So now this has a connective with Cain and Abel, if you will, that, like I say, with typology gets echoed through the Bible, and you see the idea that even twins, brothers are twins, and so you see this idea of a red-headed twin that's listed as red, and that Jacob has trouble with in the Bible, and it goes back and forth, but then he finally catches up to Jacob after he has fought all night, which recreates an ideal out of a Sumerian mythology where one wrestles with God, and after which he meets back with Seth, and he says, and he reconciles with him, says that he has the face of God. And in the story, it's looked at as that him, along with his mother, helped to steal the inheritance that was supposed to be in him by deluding a near blind or blind man into believing that this might have been another sun. And they do a foolish thing with a goat skin and stuff, and it's just kind of a joke whenever you really look into it, but it actually is meant to have another connection that you can see in this same story here. And so whenever I tell you there are echoes all over the place that really have connections that people don't make, all you have to do is keep making them. And I'm not even going into like the second realm of the exposure of all this. I'm just kind of hitting it back and forth with a few strings. Osiris' wife, though Isis, reassembled his corpse and resurrected her dead husbands long enough to conceive his son and their heir, Horus, but she couldn't find one thing, which was his penis, and the fish had eaten it, and so on. And if you look at the weird story, he was reborn out of a tree that they find over in Canaanite lands or something, and this has that echo that's in the idea of Semiramis and Dumuzi, and how he gets reborn out of a tree, right? But also, that goes back to the earliest of coffins, for they used to, many people, use trees and would hollow it out like a canoe, and this was their sarcophagus. And at one time, they would let these sarcophaguses go and let them carry into the afterlife. Yeah, it's a strange thing. We'll get into that some other time, maybe when we talk about afterlife or the whole Egyptian thing about it. And people would even make little boats and put them out on the Nile and stuff. And there's little effigy dolls that they had. And indeed, there are certain cultural places that we know right there that if we were to dig up, you would find thousands and thousands of these type of things. But it would really screw up the Nile whenever you did it. You'd almost have to redirect it around it and then try to dig up the areas and so on. And that's just really a hell of an adventure. But now Set is the son of Geb, who is the earth. So he's the son of Mary, or well, she's the waters, but then there only is waters, and then Nut. So she's the earth, and the other god's the sky, and Nut is the sky. His siblings are Osiris, Isis, and Nephthys. He married Nephthys and fathered Anubis. And Anubis is the god of the dead. In some accounts, he had relationships with a foreign goddess, Anat, as in Anatolia, and Astarte, which is the same representation. And Inanna and Diana is that same representation, and Anatolia goes with that. I think I just said that. The meaning of the name Set is unknown, but it is thought to have been originally pronounced Seth or Soth, and based on spellings of his name in Egyptian hieroglyphs as Seth or Suth, and late Egyptian spelling Sets reflects, or Setsh reflects the palpitization of H or a Shemitic sound, while the eventual loss of the final consonant is recorded in spellings like Suetj, and the Coptic form of the name Set. It is the basis for the English vocalization Set. And we call this a sunset to this day. And do you think the sun sets someplace, like it's been running all day and it sits down over there between sacred mountains? Well, no, it keeps going around the other side, but Horus is sitting in his boat, and once he's been protected, and who's protecting him? Set. Set heralds the dawn. What? Yeah, and then Horus rides 12 hours through the day. So this is the yin and yang of a day, and a big circle of life, and an epoch. Yeah, it's amazing, and it has to do with all these people, and apparently one of them's redhead, right? From the earliest of dynasties. And you can see this flip-flop there, and it's not like, oh, he's Satan or anything. Well, he's the part that's yin and yang in their pantheon, and because he's the one that protects him and so on, you can be this or you can be that. If they started having a religion that was based on perhaps what your hair color was as who you were with, and that guy becomes king, there you go. And so yin and yang. Well, hey, there's two people pushing the boat here with oars. One pushes and the other, and one pushes, and you help to steer and do things, and it all works together. And it's not always, this person. For every once in a while, there has to be red-haired orange man bad who really sets things back in order and brings things back, and here it goes, and back in, and gives direction to the situation that's going. For he's actually leading the boat. Right? So the Set animal in art sections usually depicted as an enigmatic creature referred to by Egyptologists as a Set animal, and it's looked like it's being an aardvark, perhaps a donkey, jackal, or finnet fox. And this is aspects where if it's his cunning and he's this and he's that, so he actually gets multiple effects that goes along with him, and it's pretty neat. The animal has a curved snout, and so whenever they get that curved look onto it, it really only can be a arching down of either a finnet fox pretty much or an aardvark at that point, and it shouldn't be anything else. Sure, the nose tapers on a donkey a little, but that's not what they're showing pictures of it. So there's some more information down here. Let's see. Set animals comes from the tomb dating in the Amratian culture of Naqada time of period, so way pre-dynastic here, and they find ceremonial mace heads of Scorpion II, a ruler of Naqada III period. The head and the forked tail of the Set animal are clearly present then. And so whenever I say, they say that he was from foreign lands, and yet it still goes massively pre-dynastic. The whole dynastic come together was something that wasn't, sure, we call it Dynasty 1, but now we've had to make up Dynasty 0. And then there has to really be a Dynasty -1, and then there has to be the formation and founding of separate city-states that end up being north and south, and so on. Just like in America, there was a few colonies, and it went on, so you end up with 13 states, and da-da-da, and then the north has all the bureaucracy, the south has all the food, and they got to put it together, and you can see this kind of reflected there, too. Hey, America has Memphis. It's right near a big river, too. So let's just go back to the other type of story, although, man, this has some good information in it too. I'd like to read both of them, but it's going to get longer and longer and longer and longer. Oh, man, I might have to do both of them because he's the protector of Ra. And everybody says, no, he's Satan, and he's the protector of Ra. You don't get the symbology. People have taken it out of context now. The Hyksos king Apophis is recorded as worshiping Set exclusively. What? Yeah, there's monotheism again, and it's happened a few times through here and everything in the Egyptian type people, but everybody says no, and then they, Akhenaten, it's, well, we can see already here this had a lot to do with that type of situation, right? It even tells you that a papyrus of Salier the First, he chose for his lord the god Seth. He did not worship any other deity in the whole land except Seth. And that's the Hyksos. And we've correlated that to being the Exodus. Whenever they come in, help them out. For they brought the chariot and horses versus a donkey. And it made a huge difference. Of course, they couldn't use them in the desert very much. It bogged down extremely bad. And they didn't think of making extremely wide tires back then or anything along that nature, or four-wheel drive type thing. Well, horses have four-wheel drive, but they have to pull this thing through. So it can only be used in certain areas. And back then, we're talking about, it wasn't near as desert as it is now. It was a little bit more lush. There was a little more trails and pathways that carts could be taken in. So they overthrew those Hyksos, though, and the Set cult there flourished in Avaris quite well. The Egyptian garrison of Ahmose station there became a part of the priesthood of Seth himself. So the Egyptians were still doing this. It wasn't like, well, he was worshiping this, now we're going to ruin it all. No, it kept going on for a while. Definitely. But in your Bible, you can see an echoing of that, but calling it different people and having this. And there's an echo again of it where he talks about the Canaanites and Phoenicians and how they're the king of Tyre, and oh, son of Satan type situation he throws on him. Woe is that crap that happened to you. And God caused all this too, even though you're not even really over you. And man, all these things are happening and stuff. But it tries to, of course, back then relate anything that happens to a God. So let's go back to Seth Parebsen here real quick and see where we're at, because there's some interesting stuff here too. Those seal impressions, those cylinder seals that come from Sumeria and them and a few others in this crescent that were all connected at one time and helping to make this kingship situation, are found in Parebsen's tomb at Abydos and show several deities. One of those deities is ash, as we talked about it, and it's strange, and that goes with ash trees too, to some extent. Now, showing of ash, and he looks more like an ibis type thing. He was the ancient Egyptian god of oases. So like the egret and the cattle birds or something, and they show up, and of course you see birds flying to oases, and at this time with the desert drying back up, we're left with what used to be a flourishing land and very few people, if any, in some oases. And there's an oracle out there that they go to and so on that's kept around an oasis, right? It's also as known as the vineyards of the western Nile Delta, and thus is viewed as a benign deity. Flinders Petrie in 23 Expedition to the Saqqara found several references to ash and Old Kingdom wine jar seals. Those wine jar seals actually say something like, I am refreshed by his ash. I'm refreshed by this god Ash, who does these things. He shows me the way to water, if you will. Now, here's another strange deity is Min, and I could do a whole set on him and might as well. For a lot of people, make the connection of Min and Menez and how it might have had a lot to do with it. And people have even made mentions of Minoans and situations, and if that even had a connection vocally, linguistically, and perhaps connective to those ancient people. Min is an ancient Egyptian god whose cult originated in the pre-dynastic period. And so that can show you why they later deified this man and put that name on him when his name was probably Narmer. Some people say they mix it with the Scorpion King, that Scorpion II was Narmer Menez. Other people have twisted and say that Horaha is the second one of those, and see that's Horus and Horus the Younger and everything, and it fits. And so it becomes a complicated mess a little bit, but God, I don't want to get into the dichotomy of all that. But he was from way back then. He was represented in many different forms, but is most often represented in male human form, some with an erect penis. He holds his left hand in an upright holding arm, holding a flail, as Kim or Min. So Kemet, or the land of the soil. He was the god of reproduction or rebirth. This is also seen as bending into an Osiris type mythology, and why that might have come so important, and why they pegged this one guy Menez as being something that goes into it, and how he formed things, and people were able to go forth and prosper and multiply. So, and he's also listed as being a reproduction as a form of Khnum, right? So Khnum also is a ram-headed type god, and then we have that Aries connection too, and it works all together. Why is he drawn dark here? It's like a Ka statue, and the statue of rebirth. And instead of being red like the desert, he's part of the Kim of the dark soil and things, and it goes with Osiris. But Osiris, of course, is not just the soil, but he is the rebirth of plants. And later he becomes heralding spring, and so on, right? Then we have Bastet. And Bastet is that goddess that we see that looks like a black panther. She's the ancient goddess of Egyptian religion, worshipped as early as the second dynasty. So when we're talking about how it goes in, and Bastet, her name also rendered as Bast or Ubast or Basset, and giving it a feminine kin to it. But if people paid attention, Basset is Ba, like Ba and Ka, of Set. And so there was this whole pantheon that later you get to just like, yeah, well, throw your soup into mine, screw it, that sounds good together situation. And it builds this incredible pantheon. In ancient Greek religion, she was known as Aliros. And Aliros is weird. Alirophobia is the fear of cats and felines and stuff. But allurism is also another form of way of saying just exactly what this picture looks like. It is human animism with cats, and alluros also is used later in describing how mice get killed by cats and how they're a predator of these things that helps all things around. But then a mouse is looked at as being a great thing also at some point in the Egyptian theogony, and that shows up my D&D stuff too and everything. So not going to go too much farther with that though, but there are even connections with fish and stuff that ends up going with this. Wonder if I shouldn't just kick you and show it what alluros means. Let's. Allurophobia is fear of cats. Cats was basically alluros. Phobos is fearing, right? Phobia. Alluromancy is having divination from cats. The idea of the Greek list that shows them here, it is alluros meaning cat and anthropos meaning human. So alluranthropy would be like cat type humans, right? They use it for methods of divination. Alluromantia. They're the ideal rodent killers. Uses the Greek word cat was alluros, meaning the thing with a waving tail. And you see how a cat throws his tail back and forth and then straightens it and strikes. Right? Attic Greek, it had to do with imps. Right? There you go. Here's one that has to do with sharks and a few other things. Blind sharks were known as brachli or lyrus. And so it kind of meaning cat. So what is that? Well, it's basically a cat type shark. Doesn't have extreme good vision. So these other deities showing this is part of his pantheon, suggesting they were venerated during Parebsen's time on the throne. And by saying that they were venerated, it looks like they show up and become part of the pantheon along with his group. So that grows part of the yin and yang of the pantheon that they have, just like the Greeks have and everything, and the stories that they have. And one's the brother is the god of death and he's the god of life, and this is this and that, and it's just yin and yangs and counterparts and situations and aspects. This finding argues against Parebsen worshiping just a single god. They were promoting monotheism, but not really if you look at it in the way I'm talking about it. Just like right now, when you think we have monotheism, we don't, because Jesus is the Son of God, and oh, well, the only way that you can make it monotheism is to say, well, he is him. And then when you put that we is him, he is him, then it puts it together, and you go, oh, okay, that's just like in the other religions where they say he's reborn. And it becomes a separate second aspect. The heretic theory of Newberry, Kearney, and Grisdorf and others was devised from the very limited archaeological information during their lifetimes. Most of the clay seal impressions found were still undeciphered and untranslated in their time. In the opinion of Saint Fair Garnot and Tevelde, the name Parebsen, according to religious meaning, even before the association with an deity, the name Parebsen literally means he who comes forth by their will. His heart and will comes forth for them. The Egyptian syllables sun means them, there, or those, revealing a clearer plural writing, but also there is us and there is them. And while it's these two groups coming together, they're both primordial Caucasians. Well, does only one of them have a blue eye trait or anything? No, and it doesn't seem that at all. By looking at the Nakata cultures and Badarians that were there, and the culture that's the Natufians even running into that, they all had that situation too. And then, of course, the ones that are known as the Horners that are helping to make this up, that all came into one of each other and still later looked as the land of Punt in situation, have that same situation. It's the same idea that you can say In tomb effigies, it says, "I knit upon the head of the blue-eyed Horus, the god who acts." And then Typhon is clearly pointed out as being a red-headed, blue-eyed person too. And we look at blue-eyed statues. God, I'm going to do it to you guys. I know you've seen it too many times. But for those who haven't, if you simply type in blue-eyed Egyptians and go to Google Images, you're going to see from earliest of dynasties. In fact, this is the second king ever, Horaha, and his crystal blue-eyed statue. Even though they found it in a cache in a 12th dynasty tomb, it's looked at as being, well, that's Horus that they're using there in many ways. There's some arguments on that. There's no argument that it's a Caucasian with blue eyes, and he's representative of the earliest dynasties. And then we have 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 8th dynasty, all the way through the 12th, that are using these incredible crystal blue eyes. And one important one even later is Nefertiti, and it shows that she's missing one eye there, but that one is definitely blue. And all these crystal blue eyes that are seen all the way through, they kind of follow you around. And of course, Sumerians have blue eyes and stuff, and there's a lot of them. I think it's 16 that they even have touted as a lot, as being main ones that you can see pictures of and so on. Nofret like this, there's something wrong with that. But also even in the Akkad culture here, pre-dynastic, they are having this blue-eyed situation go on with it, right? So looking back at it again, so he who comes forth by their will, or it's by will alone that he sets his mind in motion, or the god is acting. The Egyptian syllable sin, though, talks about them or their, and so there must be somebody talking about them as being them, not we, but still tabulating down without having a problem doing so. But there's an odd connection there. Garnot and Parebsen are convinced that the heraldic Seth animal, as Serek patron, was also linked his name to Horus. And if true, it would prove that Parebsen worshipped Horus and Seth on an equal footing during his time. And that may have been the effect, but he was standing up for a point for the red-headed god Typhon versus perhaps blue, or the blonde or brown, black-headed Horus, which seems like he would probably go, being the sun, go with more of the blonde-haired situation. But they always wore symbolic wigs that were always dark-haired, though, and it's kind of make it one of the people kind of thing too. A lot of people see. Anyhow, so when we look farther into this, he talks about an ostentations, plural meaning with religious ambiguity, was not uncommon for the pharaoh's names in early Egyptian dynasties. So just saying gods versus God didn't necessarily mean that it was from another pantheon, or that it was just one single solitary god that they go. Oh, isn't that weird? Solitary, Sol, the sun, solitary. Yeah, okay, so, but it kind of shows that there's a whole pantheon, and Elohim shows there's a whole pantheon of gods, and whether they strip that away from it later and talk about a whole bunch of angels that are the counterpart of them, they're just taking parts of the other aspects and doing things in God's will and so on, and it still works along the same lines. And people don't make the connection, well, he's just one. Oh yeah, well, Zeus was telling everybody to do this, you know, Jupiter before that, Uranus before that, Cronus, whichever one you want to call out. Parebsen may have been perceived as a living incarnation of both Horus and Seth in equal measures, like his predecessors on the throne. And there was this theory that what they had taken is that due to the pantheon that was before him and the other one, there might have been a redheaded and a blonde, and they had a kid, and that was the first son, and he grew up, and bam, so it puts him in position. But he signifies both. And hey, maybe like Ginger, he was more strawberry blonde instead of a ginger, true ginger redheaded. Who knows? But there are a lot of ideas. As further examples, the titles of early dynastic queens use plural patron deities, such as she who is allowed to see Horus and Seth. Yeah, so that's on a bunch of tombs, and it shows you they're connective and pretty much the brothers of yin and yang that made it all happen. Oh, and is one Satan? No, 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 no. He was his helper. It all works a different way. Well, but yeah, but he kills Osiris, and he does. Yeah, there you go. So we can get the Uranus idea and cosmos, and get to the next level of it. It's very much like the other religions if you've done comparative religion. If not, at least you can probably see an echo in this. So she was allowed to see Horus and see Seth night and day, the concept. Who's allowed to understand. She who carries Horus and Seth. So she that carries it on, perhaps in some lights too. Similarly, the unusual Sarek of King Kashim and Kimwi, so it has to do with Kim, right? And people say it has to do with Knum also. The last ruler of the second dynasty, so leading into this, or after this, shows the deities of Horus and Seth together atop the Sarek. Horus wears the white crown of Upper Egypt, and Seth wears the red crown of Lower Egypt. And it's kind of showing their connections. But oddly, Seth is now showing me a crown of Lower Egypt, where we talked about him being Upper Egypt just at the end of the last one, and where he had come from. The two gods are depicted facing each other in a kissing gesture, which doesn't have to be gay or anything like that, guys, for even in French and things like that, when people are respected or in families, quite often that happens. In my family, it seems strange to me that I saw it with our family in giving family members kisses, even my father, until a much older age, and yet I only noticed it in a couple of other families that I'd ever go to their house during events and anything like that ever. But I'm sure it went on a lot more than that. But it doesn't necessarily mean any weird connotations or anything like that. For back in these days, it was definitely a sign of respect and carried on through. And there's some type of heritages that are kept like that are really fading away from humanity. And man, I guess we'll never know if it's a tragedy or not until much longer after it happens, and then you'd have to rebirth the situation again. And isn't it funny how I keep talking about that and the way that has gone through our cycle of religious thought, and how the sun worshiping started out apparently before humanity even had it going on over 50,000 years ago, and it led into all kinds of things, and understanding the sun and its cycles was able to be used during farming, and to know when to move, and cattle, and signs in the sky, and signs of the animals, and here goes those ducks again. And being able to say that was the alpha that started pretty much all of this, although we had some animism going on, that was the king of everything that was going on. And at the end, as we ring it around with Jesus, he is a reborn, undying sun god like Sol Invictus, and it still happens and runs through, for the sun dies every December 21st and 3 days later rises again on December 25th. I know it doesn't work exactly with it, and that little, change this to duh, and spring goes there, and then they have made it all brand new. No, it's not in any way if you compare it, and it's still the same type of thing. So talking about those plural meanings, and Parebsen may have been perceived as a living incarnation of both Horus and Seth, as they said. Similarly, the unusual Sarek of that ruler of the last second dynasty shows them together, and both the crowns, one on each one, and the unifying. And perhaps there was a king of upper and a king of lower, and they were unified as one. And one of the two was the major ruler, and the other one was just a governor, and it flipped back and forth somewhat through dynasties. A lot of people agree with that totally. At least they say, well, when it gets to this point, that's going on, and the intermediate period that comes shortly after this, the first one. So let's look into it more and go on. So this special name was meant to illustrate the dual incarnation of the king as representative of Horus and Seth, perhaps a union, perhaps somebody. He was the union of the Hatfields and the McCoys. Could even go that far. The power over all of Egypt. Consequently's name can be interpreted as an advanced form of Parebsen's Serek name. And so he seems to be an echoing of that same situation, right? And you hook up Kim to the middle of that too, and you can see how that connected earlier that we were talking about. It's one of the reasons I brought that in right then, so it flops. And you can see, well, oh, they had some Osiris thing going on. Yeah, they do too. So just kind of put it all together, like Greco-Roman gods kind of mesh pretty good. It's amazing how a lot of these mesh pretty good. Where we at? 36, still going strong, guys. Pardon me. Coffee. Egyptologists Ludwig David Morenz and Wolfgang Helk remarked that the targeted gouging of Seth animals did not occur until the New Kingdom of Egypt. The insurer of the Seth chimera on Parebsen tomb stelae had been attributed to activity shortly after his death under the heretic theory. New discoveries suggest that the defamation occurred centuries later, that something went bad in some other dynasty, and then, oh, they got all democratic about everything and decided to deface a bunch of crap. Which is kind of disgusting when you look at it so much later. Historian Dietrich Weldung states that the necropolis of Abydos was the only one plundered in antiquity. The tombs at Saqqara and Giza were also ransacked. Thus, he concludes that any targeted action against one particular pharaoh can be excluded. In other words, well, if it did go versus one, it may went one versus one, but then apparently through these dynasties right here, everybody got hit. So it's not a targeted situation, but other ones they can definitely key as, oh, it's targeted. And apparently the guy right after it just disappears him. And all of a sudden on his king's list, it shortens up and that guy's gone. Like what tried to happen to Akhenaten, and we would have known about Tut or anything else to the person after Tut. So it just looks like, man, this guy must have lived a long time, and then this guy shows up. The earlier, also political theories, slightly different. The earlier theories of Newberry, Cerny, and Garloff said that the Egyptian state under Parebsen suffered from several civil wars under economical, political, and origin. If he was held responsible for putative misery in the past, this would explain why later king lists excluded Parebsen. There's a thought that at one time the crops failed in one other point, or it flooded too bad and kind of ruined their situation, but the other had, and because he had the upper hand, he may have abused it in a situation that they didn't like ever happening again. Well, was that Parebsen? No, not necessarily, but they're going to key it on those Sethite people and attach it all the way back up to who the hell started the Democratic Party. Almost like that, maybe, if you will. I don't know, there's so many flip-flop ways of looking this, depending on just which frame of mind you're going in, because it's so foggy. But even though it's foggy, we're still able to grasp upon things that make connectives. And one thing that's not a connective usually spoke about is Seth or Set, and how he comes from right in the first dynasties. And yeah, they have first two kids and stuff, and then they have another one in the Bible, and that's Seth. And oh wait, that's what goes on in this pantheon pretty much too, isn't that amazing? It's just like that. And then two brothers, and then all these things, and it all comes from them. And kind of like that boat theory, kind of like that one separated people who everything seems to come out from there. And of course, we know the pantheons follow families, and even later, whenever they disintegrate a certain family lineage and other people take over, those are probably great uncles and so on of the same thing, and they all have connectives, for they're the ones that have the rightful to heirship. And if they have that, then they definitely have connectives that are extremely close. And then, of course, male and female together makes that work. And that's part of the reason they marry their half-sister and situations like that. So there couldn't really be a contest, because if we add up all of our stuff, no, there's no contest. We're rightful heirs. Wolfgang Heck pointed out to the once palatial, well-preserved mastaba tombs at Saqqara and Abydos belonging to the high officials such as Rob M. and Nefersetek. And these are all dated from an origin of Netjer and that of Kasekemwi, and the later of the Second Dynasty. Egyptologists consider the archaeologists' record of the mastabas condition and the original architecture of that of the statewide mortuary cults for kings and noblemen operated successfully during the entire dynasty. And I tell you, that still has that niched architecture that they have straight up from Sumerians. You can look down on the building and the way it looks, and you can look down on buildings in Sumeria, and it's like niches in the right places and the whole 9 yards. I show it in some of my pre-dynastic Egypt and Egypt origin series. But let's continue. Egyptologists consider the archaeological record of the mastabas condition as proof for a statewide mortuary cults for kings and noblemen operated successfully during that entire dynasty. So things are fully kicking by then, and it starts going from there. If true, their preservation is inconsistent with the theory of civil wars, though, and economic problems during Parebsen's reign way back then. Rice, Tiradridi, Helk, and other think that Nettinger decided to leave a divided realm because of private or political reasons, and that the split was a formality sustained by the Second Dynasty kings. And so they might have still ruled from up north, but over the whole thing, and so it's looked a little different. Where, later they built in the center again, and then they built all the way down in the delta. And that's the more important region for all the trade that goes in there. And you could say it grows this way, but there are places that change. And you could see maybe in the first of which it's pretty much wherever he was is woo. Like if we were to, in America, move Washington, D.C. to the home city of where the president came from and make a new capital every time one goes through one thing, and local pride goes real hard with that situation, and statewide pride, so you could maybe see things that come out of that. The origin of the political division is unknown, though it might have happened during the beginning of Parebsen's rule or shortly thereafter. I think it has a lot to do with the priests and how they got in the middle of the things that are going with politics and so on. In America, we try real hard not to have that. In the modern day, they're trying to keep blending it together a lot. Because Parebsen chose the deity Seth as his new throne patron, Egyptologists are of the view that Parebsen was a chieftain and from Thinis, and so this is of the earliest dynasties. Thinis is, see if it shows a picture here. Well, no, but it's about mid-range there, way up at the top. It's the capital city of the first dynasties. Thinis is as yet undiscovered, but well attested by the ancient writers, including classical historian Manetho, who cites it as the center of the Thinite Confederacy, a tribal confederation whose leaders are Menez and united Egypt and stuff. And so Thinis is it's in the middle part, and a lot of people connect it to other cities and say, well, they just built onto it later, and they do know where it is. Prince of the Thinite royal house. This theory is based on Seth being a deity of Thinite origin, which would explain Parebsen's choice. His name changing may have only been nothing more than smart political and religious propaganda at the time. Parebsen is thought to have gained the Thinite throne and ruled only Upper Egypt, whilst other rulers had a Memphite